UIC United SUAA brown bag lunch presentation. If this is your first visit to one of our activities, you're most welcome, and if you're not a member, we encourage you to join. Our organization, we have special incentives through December 31st with our dues structure. We are your representative in Springfield with respect to advocating for the protection of your pension benefits and health care benefits once you are retired. We are sort of like a big sister brother organization working in cooperation with CSRS to assist them and help the organization and its benefits in Springfield. Further information can be obtained from Sue Sindelar, who's manning our membership table with some literature over there. I'd also like to let you know that today's presentation is being webcasted live and will also be available for viewing by archive on the www.ustream.tv website. Ustream is spelled U-S-T-R-E-A-M. And if you'd like to go home and watch it later, you're encouraged to. All you have to do is go to that website, type in the search phrase UIC-United, and our various archived webcasts will be there for your viewing and listening pleasure. Today's speaker needs really no introduction. He's well known to the UIC community as well as the Chicagoland community. Professor Dick Simpson, who is the head of the Department of Political Sciences here, who will speak to us today on the 2010 election and what it means to you. We're looking forward to his insightful analysis, as we always do. Dick.
Thank you very much. Even though I'm still active on the faculty, I am a member of this organization. Take some pleasure in that, and we'll take even more pleasure if all of their lobbying efforts are successful this year, which would be wonderful for all of us here at UIC and across the state. So I want to talk about the meaning of the 2010 election. You know a lot of the factoids about so-and-so won such and such. But how does it fit together as a pattern? 2010, nationally and in Illinois, was a seesaw or wave election. And that's not quite a technical term, but it's one in which the Republicans made major gains. The governmental pendulum, which had swung so heavily in 2008 with the election of President Obama, and had seen the same kinds of positive swings for the Democrats here in Illinois, has now swung back. But from all the evidence we've gathered since the election, and it's still early, but I think this will hold up, this is not a permanent change, or at least there is no evidence yet that it's a permanent change. That doesn't make it not a change, and that doesn't mean that it isn't important, but it means that it isn't a permanent transformation. Now, why is that? Well, there are a couple of things that we can tell you from political science. The first thing is that in most elections, voters vote retrospectively. And President Reagan's, to paraphrase, at this election, famous phrase, voters ask themselves, are you better off than you were 2 years ago? And then if they are better off, they reward the government that's in power. And if they're not better off, they punish the government that's in power, hoping to get someone else in power who will make their lives, their communities, their nation better off. So the answer to that question on election day was a resounding no. That's the answer this year. Why is that? Well, there are some obvious reasons, which I'm sure all of you can answer for yourselves. But the voters look around, look at their own circumstance, and they discover that unemployment is still 10%. 10%, a tenth of the nation are unemployed. And in addition, if you live in a minority community, say in Chicago, and you look around, you may find 40%, say for instance, of African American males are unemployed in the so-called ghetto communities, those areas of high concentration of poverty. When they look around, they see an epidemic of home foreclosures. Maybe they're worried about their own home. Will they be able to pay the mortgage? Will they be able to keep their place? Or maybe their cousin or their aunt or their mother has had their home foreclosed on. They look around and they see many, many, many small businesses are failing. We know about all the big headlines. I was talking to a small business owner in my own community who runs an import business. She's been running it very well. Her books are fine. She's not facing bankruptcy. But her main supplier went bankrupt. And her main customer went bankrupt. And it's very hard if you're a small business to get credit to add employees, to build new stock, to create a new product line, any of those things. You can't just go to the bank like you used to and say, got a good credit rating, our company's been going X number of years, surely you can give me a loan. The answer today tends to be no, we can't. Many of the banks that have been taken over, even the neighborhood banks like Ravenswood Bank in my neighborhood, a perfectly wonderful local bank. They don't make home mortgages, so they weren't caught up in the home mortgage battle, but they do make loans to commercial establishments. Businesses go out of business, they can't pay the loan that was originally given, they have bad loans on their books. FDIC comes in, they sell them off to another bank, they eat the losses, and we have another business crisis. I know a restaurant near me where the owner hasn't taken a paycheck for a year for himself. Well, it's kind of hard to live a year without any paycheck, even if you're a business owner, and therefore, normally better off. Voters look around and they see the middle class is shrinking. It's not as big as it used to be. They find out that we're still tied down in 2 foreign wars. They know that we have foreign enemies that are out to destroy us. That's all the objective circumstance today. So the voters ask themselves, am I better off than 2 years ago? Even in the broad sense of my community, my city, my country, is it better off? And the answer was basically not much. There is hope that we're at the bottom of the recession and that we're going to rebuild, but that hasn't actually come to pass in their own life or what they see in the neighborhood. Now, on the other hand, the Republicans were hoping, as they have continually for a long time now, that this would be what political scientists call a permanent realigning election. Now, that's different from one side or the other winning an election. A permanent realigning election, a classic one in the modern period, would be the New Deal elections when Franklin Delano Roosevelt won in 1932, won the next 4 elections, and Democrats for the next generation of voters, in fact, won nearly all of the elections other than an occasional loss of president or a particular congressman. Now, for it to be a permanent realigning election, then one party or the other doesn't just have to win the election. They have to, in the process, cause people to change their party identity, or cause all of the new young people who are entering the system, or all the new immigrants who are coming to the country when they get citizenship, to cause a whole generation of voters to say, no, I'd rather be a Republican, or I'd rather be a Democrat. That's what a permanent realigning election is about. So the question is, was this a permanent realigning election? The Republicans won a great victory. I'll detail what they won and how much that is. But it didn't change the underlying attitude. The Pew Research Center polls, released just after the election, show that by 52 to 42%, more voters expressed an unfavorable opinion than a favorable opinion for the GOP. Okay? They didn't say, oh, this is our great savior, they're coming in, this party is the one we want to identify with. No, they simply decided, this election I will vote for Smith over Jones. I'm unhappy with the way the country's going, or I'm happy with my life, and therefore I'm going to vote that way. Now, Democrats shouldn't get too excited about the fact that more voters think unfavorably of Republicans than think favorably, because they are about equally matched. The Pew Center found that 53% of the voters are unfavorable in their view of the Democrats, to only 43% favorable. So the Pew Trust, the research center, said, and I'm quoting them here, the outcome of this election represented a repudiation of the status quo, rather than the political status quo, rather than a vote of confidence for the GOP or a statement in support of its policies. Now, what about Illinois? Things could, not have changed fundamentally nationally, but are we to take the election results in Illinois as a sign that something's basically different? And the answer is still mostly no. This election did not change Illinois from a blue Democratic state to a red Republican state, despite Republican gains. It did revitalize a very weak Illinois Republican Party, but the voter preferences in this election could just as easily swing back in the next election. That is, they weren't permanent. They were about particular candidates, particular issues, and particular circumstances. Governor Edgar has noted that the loss of the governor's office is a major setback in the rebuilding of the Republican Party in Illinois. They don't have a chief executive around whom they can build the party. And so even though they made gains, which I'll outline in just a second, that's not a total transformation anymore than it was at the national level. Well, what are the gains? Did the Tea Party driven national Republican wave come to Illinois? The answer is clearly yes. And it's most clearly seen in the congressional elections. First of all, of course, Mark Kirk defeated Alexei Janulius for President Obama's former U.S. Senate seat. And that is more than just a symbolic victory, although we would say it's President Obama's seat. It is major that the Republicans won that election. Bob Dole, in a close race, held on to Kirk's former 10th district seat, so that the Republicans didn't lose any congressional seat. In fact, depending upon whether they win Melissa Bean's 8th district seat, they won 3 of the 4 congressional seats that had been captured previously by the Democrats. They defeated Debbie Halverson in the 11th district, Bill Foster in the 14th, and Philip Hare in the 17th. So the Republicans gained back what they had lost in the suburban ring around Chicago at the level of the Congress, the level of the congressional, and that makes a big difference. For instance, the Republicans needed to win 39 seats to take back the U.S. House, and we're still counting some elections like the Melissa Bean election, but they won about 60 seats, so that they have a significant majority now in the House of Representatives. On the U.S. Senate side, the Republicans needed to win 9 seats, and they won 6, so the Democrats maintain a small majority. Well, what does this mean, that the Republicans won control of the House, and they won a significant minority now in the U.S. Senate? I'll quote Business Week magazine. Business Week magazine says, the business community, which heavily funded the Republican campaigns, look for the Republicans to weaken or block, quote, what they consider President Obama's anti-business policies on health care, the environment, taxes, and financial reform. The results will immediately bolster Republican efforts to extend Bush-era tax cuts for those earning more than $250,000. So it makes a difference who wins elections. It makes a difference at the level of policy, and we will see that in the coming years. But I want to turn, since most of your interest as a group has been on state politics, I want to spend most of my time talking about what happened at the state level. At the Illinois state level, The Republicans, in addition to their congressional wins, won 2 constitutional or statewide offices, with Judy Bar-DePinka being reelected as state comptroller and Dan Rutherford elected as state treasurer. That gives them a position from which to criticize the actions by Governor Quinn and the Democratic-controlled state legislature. But they lost the big prize. Pat Quinn was reelected governor, and by about 20,000 votes. We'll know when they finish at the end of the month counting. And the Democrats continue to have strong majorities in both the Illinois House and the Illinois Senate. From a position of power, that means they're in a much better situation for the redistricting, which will redistrict the congressional districts and will redistrict every state legislative district. And it means if they can figure out what the Democratic policies were, they would have a chance of getting them through. Nonetheless, they're constrained. They can't do everything. The biggest constraint is they face today a $13 billion deficit, which is expected to grow to a $15 billion deficit. It's not going down, it's going up. Well, that means if they want to fund more daycare, they want to fund a social program, they want to help the homeless, they want to do whatever, they're going to be in a difficult position with their own budget. The most important issue, particularly I think to this group, but to everybody in Illinois, is what will happen in the veto override session that starts immediately, a few weeks, and we'll pick up again in January with a new session of the legislature, particularly if a special session is called in early January. And that will be whether these lame duck sessions with the old legislators still in office before the new legislators are sworn in will be willing to pass the income tax increase. So why is the income tax increase such an important issue? Now, obviously, all of you know it means that you will lose in your pocketbook. The state income tax will go from 3% to 4%. And it'll have an effect on the tax level in the state of Illinois should it pass. But it also is critical to whether or not we can begin to resolve the budget issue. Well, some will say we don't have to pass the income tax. We could just wait and pass a new casino bill. We could expand gambling in the south of Chicago. At best, the expansion of gambling were it to work and to pass, which is not always Governor Quinn, for instance, doesn't say, would bring $1 billion in. $1 billion is good money. It'd take a while, a year or two, before we got that level of money into the system, but it would help. But an income tax would bring in $3 billion. And it would not only solve the problem of state government, the income tax is shared with the local governments, meaning the counties and the cities that are general units of government, so that it would ease the pressure on all of the governments in the state. So that it wouldn't be so necessary to have massive property tax increases, for instance, which is likely to be the alternative if the income tax doesn't pass at the local level. Now, even if the income tax were to pass, and even if they could somehow figure out how to implement it quickly and they could get in $3 billion, which would be a good thing, the debt would not be $15 billion, it'd be back to 12 or 11 or 10. There's still going to be major cuts. And that's going to happen over the next couple of years. Because until the economy recovers, the amount we get off of things like the income tax and the sales tax are not sufficient to fill the gap. If you look at the state expenditures versus the state income, it's not just that we have a gap going flat across. What you have is an exponential gap that grows every year. For instance, it is predicted by the best of our people in the Institute for Government and Public Affairs, professional economists, that no matter what we do, likely, the budget gap, at least without the income tax, will certainly be $15 billion by 2015, but it'll be $30 billion by 2030. Our expenses are going up, our revenue is not, And this is unsustainable. It's what's known as a structural deficit as opposed to a bad spending year when someone made a mistake spending money. The best remedy is to get the economy moving again as quickly as possible, but that can't be done quickly. That's the long-term solution. So what does it mean for the University of Illinois? Well, it means that there will be not be the automatic 10% cut that Brady had campaigned on, that he was going to cut everything, including the state universities, by 10% sort of the first day he walked in the office. The cuts will be more surgical than that, but it will continue to be a cut. And at the department level, for instance, and at the college level here, we are planning for at least a 10% cut in the state funding part of our budget. Fortunately, we have some other resources with the new tuition that make it quite not so draconian. But what happens, let me tell you what happens at the department level. At the Department of Political Science, I had 4 employees to run the administrative operation of the department. I now have 2 employees to run the administrative operation of the department. It is hard for 2 people to do as much as 4. We're not going to get some things done properly. It's simply physically, humanly impossible. We will make the best adjustment we can. I had this year the choice. I could hire adjunct faculty to teach more courses because we have more students. We have now more than 26,000 students at UIC. We're teaching 1,433 in political science alone. I had the choice of having adjunct faculty. The way I tell it is if Albert Einstein were available to teach calculus, I couldn't hire him. It's simply not in my budget because my other choice was to keep or not keep the graduate program. If I eliminated the graduate students, the consequences would be much more profound. We would not do as good research, we would not have as much teaching because the teaching assistants wouldn't be there over time, and we would lose our standing as a so-called research one university. We would be back to sort of the Navy Pier days, not quite instantly, but that's where that road leads when you eliminate your graduate program. Those kinds of choices are the choices we're making with the kinds of state budgets we're getting. And those are the kind of hard choices we will be making in the year ahead, given what we have from the results of the election and the problems, literally, of government. Let me cover just 2 more areas. I haven't talked about Cook County, haven't talked about Chicago, haven't talked about the suburbs, and I haven't talked about the pension specifically. So I'll try and run through the local governments first. The obvious thing that has happened is Toni Preckwinkle has won her position as Cook County Board President, and that means she can now attempt to reform that government. Her problem, her immediate problem, is her first budget is due December 3rd. I'm sorry, she gets sworn in December 3rd. She has to, by mid-December, present her budget. Her budget gap is a small gap. It's only $300 million. The budget is 80% personnel. How do you think you can find $300 million in a budget that's 80% personnel costs? She is going to have to let some other people go. Moreover, she has pledged within her term to eliminate the other 0.5% sales tax, which is good news for all of us who buy things. It is difficult news for the county. It means she will have to cut at least another $300 million from the county budget over the years ahead. Tony Pareka was defeated in his re-election effort as a county commissioner. What that means on the Republican Board of Commissioners is the Republicans are now much weaker in many of the issues they present because Tony Pareka isn't there. The Democrats are stronger, which makes it a little easier for Toni Preckwinkle and her proposals, but it doesn't necessarily mean the government will be better. In Chicago, we're glad that the preliminaries are over, that other election somebody held that was of not much consequence, and we're now into the battle royal for mayor. And I think I'll leave for questions, but I can't believe there won't be some about the mayoral election, but I will just simply say there's one important date, and that's next Monday, the 15th. 15th is when petitions are filed. The 15th is when all the posturing is over and people lay down their cards. Either they have 20 or 30,000 signatures so they can get 12,500 legitimately. Either they're on their way into $4 million or so of fundraising, meaning they have something more than a piggy bank in their bank account as a campaign, or they don't. And we will know that certainly by the end of petition filing the 22nd, but I think by the 15th we will know that. In the suburbs are critical to the Democratic Party's future. The Democrats just lost big in most of the suburbs, not in the state legislative races. They in fact won. For instance, Brian Daugherty, who was an alderman, was trying to win as a Republican and lost the seat to the incumbent Democrat and so forth. The state races didn't change so much, and most of the local elections aren't likely to change too much, but the congressional elections did. All of the congressional Democrats from the suburbs, other than possibly Melissa Bean, have been eliminated. Now the information on the pensions. The good news is that despite lobbying by the Economic Club and the other business-oriented organization, the actual pension payments to the pensioners will not be cut in the future. The Democrats, at least, and probably most of the Republicans, are convinced that the Illinois Constitution does protect pension benefits. So if you are already receiving a pension, or you will soon, your pension payments are safe. What is not safe are your requirements that you may have to pay more for health benefits or some of the others. And there is also now a two-tier pension system, meaning new people coming into the system don't have as good a guarantee as you had when you entered the pension system, when you became an employee at UIC. The other good news is the pension balances are improving. That's for a simple reason. The stock market and everything associated, even bonds and other investments, are essentially of greater value than they were a year ago. There has been a consistent increase. We have investments as a pension system in the stock market, bond market, and other markets. They're carefully regulated, but we do have investments. And those investments, as you'll see in your service report, indeed went up and will probably continue to go up. That is at least reasonable. Nonetheless, hundreds of millions of dollars have to be made in payments to the pension fund each year by the state government. That is necessary to even keep us at the level of funding that we are. And the bill to do that is at the moment stuck. It's been passed by the Senate, but not yet approved by the House. And the governor can't wave a magic wand and simply, what they're talking about doing is not so great, but at least it funds the pensions. They're talking about borrowing the money so they can pay, I think it's the $300 million, you guys will have a better number than I do, into the pension this year. And that's going to be the immediate future because the budget of the state is in such a bad circumstance. You've got a $15 billion hole. One way you can solve a few billion of that is to not pay into the pension funds as much as you can get by with. Which again brings me back to the critical point, which employees of the university, students of the university, and pensioners of the university system need to focus on. And that is whether or not either in the current session that starts or in the January special session, we can get the state income tax passed. If it does not pass, the pressure to do bad things to the pension money will be pretty overwhelming. The governor will sign, introduce and promote. The Senate has passed the income tax in the last session. The issue comes down to whether or not Mike Madigan in the House of Representatives is willing to support the income tax increase. And his decision is based on a calculation. If the Democrats pass the income tax with no Republican support or votes at all, then they will be stuck as having done the income tax, and they will lose, in Madigan's belief, seats in the House, which might totally change the direction in the Senate, and they will likely lose the governor's seat in 4 years. Madigan has to be convinced that the political pressure is so overwhelming that the income tax and other pension-related items have to pass. That's what the public wants, and it's so overwhelming that if the Democrats don't do it, they will be in trouble for not doing something as much as they would be in trouble for passing it. Well, that's the short answer. Again, it is a seesaw or a pendulum election. It isn't permanent. It isn't a critical realigning election, but it is an election with real consequences for control of the national government and control at the level of the state government. It builds up on the future of what the political wars are likely to be in the future times. I'll be glad to take your questions.
Thanks, Dick.
You said this is not a permanent realigning election, but given that 2011 is going to be a redistricting year, won't the impact of this election carry forward at least a decade?
It will make some changes. I didn't talk so much about the state elections. In most of the state elections, more Republican governors were elected, and in most places, other than Illinois, control of the legislature and control, particularly the governor's mansion, can make a huge difference. So in many states, the districts will be redistricted in a way that will favor the Republicans. That will not happen in Illinois unless we get to the coin toss and the coin goes the wrong way. But it will happen in a number of states. So the Democrats are less well off than if they could have redistricted last year. It depends on the state-by-state analysis. Nonetheless, as you can see with the wave that elected Obama and now the Tea Party wave that caused many Republicans to be elected, but not all, these national trends do have profound effects that can overcome even redistricting boundaries.
Does Mr. Madigan feel it's safer now that the Democrats will control the redistricting? In other words, in terms of possibly going forward with an income tax increase?
Well, I think we're in the position where we need to have a chat with Mr. Madigan. As a leader of the faculty-student group related to the furloughs last term, I did have a chat with Mr. Madigan. Many of our faculty met, and some students met with individual legislators in a more complete operation than in any previous time in this campus's history. That kind of thing needs to be done by the retirees, and that needs to be done by the faculty students, and it's going to be done by a lot of other people who care about a lot of social issues. As bad as things have been with the cuts at the university so far, it's much worse if you're running a social service agency and haven't been paid in a year or 6 months, or most of the time it's at least a year. Many of them have gone out of business. The ones that have left have cut back services. There is a potential ability to mobilize enough to have a chat that would be meaningful, both with Speaker Madigan and with individual legislators who will then go scurry over and talk to Speaker Madigan if you didn't get to talk to them directly. I strongly urge a major lobbying effort, and I urge that happen now. If you wait 9 months to lobby, you're just too late. The critical decision that will show the state of the budget next June when they do this new budget, the horse will already be gone. We either will have the income tax or we won't. And the same for true where the cuts are going to be. Are we going to do broad cuts? Are we going to do surgical cuts? Where will the cuts come? What will happen to the pensions? If we're in the same state we're in right now, they will make an effort to find money anywhere, which will include charging more for health benefits at minimum, and maybe the attempt to actually make a cut in the pensions, as we did with furloughs for employees, for instance. I think there will have a huge court case over that, but that financial pressure is enormous. We have gotten ourselves in, we are, if not the worst state in the nation, the second worst, but probably the worst. California is worse off in total numbers, but when you look at the size of the two states, New York is also dysfunctional for many of the same reasons, basically their legislature. But we're one of the really top bad states, And that's not a position we'd like to be leading in.
Sorry.
To me, the key issue of why the Democrats lost was that there was little improvement in the economy.
Right.
And the policies at the center, at the national level, didn't stimulate the economy. Is there any way of persuading the president and influencing Congress to adopt policy? I think Paul Krugman is the best writer in the New York Times Congress in terms of policy recommendation. And I think this
Basically,
is the key issue that would stimulate, improve the state financial
I understand.
condition.
That's a fine economics analysis. It doesn't quite play out that way with the new numbers in Congress. What it means in the new Congress is that we will be able to, they can do some things between now and January 20th with the lame duck Congress, but they're not going to do gigantic things on the whole. So it means we're going to be looking at the new Congress. There are areas where I think it is possible to get enough Republican votes in the Senate to be able to pass policy. A good example would be you can probably craft some legislation for helping small businesses, which are the engine of most of the economy. So if you got together something that encouraged the banks to make credit more freely available, gave a tax break to small businesses that employ more workers, X, Y, and Z, you probably can find some Republicans who want policy A and Democrats who want policies B and C. They can put together a bill that does all three and probably get enough votes. If you want to do a new TARP program or something of that size and scope, the Republicans have enough votes to kill it. So it's going to require some very careful, anything big you really want to do, you need to do this week as it were, for January 20th. And anything else you want to do, you've got to do it as a bipartisan effort, at least sufficient to get enough Republicans to go with you to get the bill safely out of the Senate. Maybe you could probably, even the Republicans might, some Republicans might cross over on the issue of the cloture vote at 60. You might be able to lower that a little if you did it right now. You won't be able to lower it because it's too good a party weapon after January 20th. So if you're going to, there are some things you could try in deciding what to put effort into right at the moment. Neither the president nor the speaker or the head of the Senate call me regularly to ask my advice about this, or Barry Rehnquist, who's a specialist on Congress. You could find a way to thread this needle, but it isn't an easy one. It's going to be very difficult, and it's going to have to somehow, most of the time, get some bipartisan traction. Now, the Tea Party people, yeah, the Pauls and the others will rant and rave and self-destruct. That's not so troublesome, but the Republican bloc in the Senate is now quite powerful and are essentially a veto section that you can't get by without some sort of compromise, pulling some Republican votes over, not losing too many Democratic votes in the process. I don't know how that's going to play out. We could have another close down in the government like we had after the Republicans won in '94 with Clinton. That's certainly within the realm of the possible.
Ralph? Yeah.
Shortly before the election, I heard a panel of economists and businessmen discussing the Illinois situation. And while they disagreed on various things, they agreed there has to be an income tax increase. They varied that it had to go to 6% or up to 8%. They also agreed that the legislature was not going to pass such a tax increase. Now, if both those things are right, the only solution basically is the national government has to inflate us out of it, or the state has to declare bankruptcy. Do you see it that bleakly?
Yeah, we don't technically have a way of being bankrupt. Orange County and some other places have tried that in a few local communities. I would prefer us not to find out how that would work. Because I tell you how it would work here. We would lose our entire amount of state funding. I already say we're not a state university, we're only a state affiliated university, because they only fund 16% of our budget currently. But, you know, $1 billion here and $1 billion there is, Dirksen used to say, he used to say it in millions, is real money. It would not be good for this university to lose 16% of its funding, total funding. Whole, I'm not talking about, you know, what the GRF and cutting the GRF by the stages. But if we literally went bankrupt, the state wouldn't be able to pay their bills. They owe us, I don't know, I didn't get any recent figures, $600, $700 million this week, whatever the number is, 200 or 300 million back from last year. The rest from this year, each month we bill them, they don't pay. Each month we bill them, they don't pay. They keep trying to get caught up with last year's bills, which they haven't managed to do. This is now November, folks. Last year started July 1st. I mean, end of June 30th, the new year started July 1st in the budget calendar. So we would be in bad shape. I don't want to try your bankruptcy route. I think for us, as for many other institutions, it would be a disaster. Yes, you could appoint some panel of business people and sages to then run the government, you know, as we've sometimes done, like with the Chicago school system when it went bankrupt. I don't think you would like what they would decide. And it would, at that point, the pensions would be on the table. We would just simply not pay the pensions for a few years and see how it went. Well, we know how it would go. I mean, it's bad enough now. It would be much, much worse. So I would be willing to do almost anything to avoid a true bankruptcy, because it would mean no more money coming from the state for pensions. They'd still be able to draw on the existing funds, but I mean, you know, the pension funding would drop to 20% funded or something. I mean, it would just be catastrophe. We would lose our bond rating. Even when a small thing happens, when Governor Blagojevich was indicted, even before the trial, the next bond issue cost us as a state $24 million more because our bond rating had gone down, because they figured we're so corrupt, we have someone like Blagojevich running the place. We're not trustworthy to loan money to. They would think much worse. I mean, if we were bankrupt or anything close to it, we would not be able to borrow money. Well, we have to borrow money. We're, you know, just like you probably wouldn't go out and buy your home with a check. You know, some of you are maybe so well off you can do that, but most of us aren't. We take out a 30-year mortgage because that way we can afford the home. Well, the state's in the same position. We really couldn't pay the bills. So, yes, that's a boogeyman worth thinking about, but mostly in terms of what would it really be like to live under that circumstance. And it would be very bad.
Dave?
A couple of questions. Illinois legislature tends not to be initiative in significant changes or even average type changes. It watches what's happening around the country and other legislators and so forth. So the question is, in terms of the changes which have taken place in many states, as you pointed out, with governors and legislatures, how much reluctance is there going to be on the part of our legislature to do anything that it has to do? And the second question is...
Well, let me answer the first.
Okay.
I'm old, I might forget it by the time we get to the second. The first question, you know, sort of how does the legislature think and work on this as if they were a person? They aren't. It's a collection of folks. But nonetheless, the legislature is pragmatic in two ways. First, they personally want to win their next re-election, or if they don't want to be personally staying on another period of time, they want whoever they choose as their successor to win the same seat. So they're motivated a good bit by what the voters would really do. Now, they can't make the leaders too mad because they hold all the money. And this terrible system we've only partially reformed in Illinois. The good news is we did do a partial reform of campaign financing. The bad news is we didn't reform the part that the legislative leaders control very much. So the legislators have been pretty pragmatic. If you can come to them with a proposal that doesn't cost any money and brings great benefits, and everybody will like them a lot, they'll all say yes. So you try and shape a proposal like that. Some of these proposals don't fit that category. Yes, they're happy to pick up innovations if they happen somewhere else. And there is, I get most of the news magazines, newsletters of like the state legislative groups. And they pay attention to what's happening elsewhere. No one else has found a really wonderful solution. Some states aren't in trouble for reasons that have to do with their economic situation. But there isn't like we can copy Rhode Island, that they've solved it over in Rhode Island, and all we have to do is copy their template of taxes and cuts, and we would be fine. Yes, the temper will be more conservative on the national landscape across states, but they're still looking for a way out. Anybody who can offer them a way out that works, it doesn't cost them votes, they're for it.
The other question I was going to ask is, we heard from Eden Martin, who claims that he has a couple of Chicago major law firms that are willing to test the constitutionality of the pensions. Do you think that has any ground, that it will have any substance?
I wouldn't test it until they cut something that is so bad that you want to test. In other words, if they said they're going to reduce your pension check by $50 a month or something, something that's very direct. I wouldn't rattle that cage, because if you go to court, given the judges we used to have the worst judicial system in the country outside of Louisiana in the state courts. It's better now, but Operation Greylord is still alive and well. There's still politically connected judges of both stripes, and there's still a lot of judges who get campaign contributions from certain interest groups, usually other lawyers. I would prefer not to have to test it. Yes, we should test it if it comes a point where something dire has happened and we're forced to test it. I would play the constitutional card, but I really keep the card as we have a guarantee, don't mess with our pensions, rather than testing it and finding out some judge thinks it isn't valid.
But Eden Martin is threatening to do away with the pension system from that perspective.
Well, but if they actually start passing legislation that does that, then we should test it.
Okay.
If, he can do what he wants to, but until they actually do something to us, we would rather have everyone believe clearly that we do have the Constitution on our side and they can't mess with the pensions, than, like I say, to have one bad court case that sets a precedent that we don't like. That's, as a person who will receive one day, hopefully, a pension, that's my idea about it. I want the legislature to be fearful they can't possibly touch the pension. I want them to all believe that as an article of faith. Now, some judge might test that case and come out with another conclusion. I just as soon not try that out when I don't have to. I like the position now, which favors the pension, the people receiving the pension. That yes, we have a constitutional absolute guarantee. There's also a very strong belief we have legal guarantees, but of course legal guarantees can be switched by any legislature and governor.
Larry,
Yeah, I want to follow up on Dave's question, because specifically, as I understand it, what Sibley Austin and those firms are saying is that the state does not have to stand in as a guarantor. If, for example, SURS went bankrupt, the state is not obligated, actually. The argument we had heard in the past was if the worst case scenario came, we go take the state to court, and on the grounds of the no impairment clause require that they at least appropriate the money to keep the system going. So their line of argument is especially, I think, dangerous, and I don't know what your evaluation of it would be.
Yeah, my position is unless they go to court, and we have to therefore find every possible defense we can to win the case, we don't want to be there first, because we like what we think the answer is currently, which is yes, we have an absolute right, they can't reduce things, and yes, if everything were to go bankrupt, the state has to pay. That's the current understanding by everybody. And I just assume that stayed the understanding rather than to find out differently under any legal theory. I get nervous when legal theories are tested before human judges. Sometimes those turn out great. I would just as soon not test this unless we have to. If we have to, then we do. When we get the best law firms we can, besides the Attorney General, who would naturally defend the state and the state's understanding, we would get private attorneys because it would be absolutely our interest to make the case turn out right from our perspective.
Over here and then.
Isn't there something called legislative intent, and can we not go back to the original CON that gave
Sure.
us that legislation?
And we can put Darn Clark Hatch on the stand and we can do all that stuff. All I'm saying is, let's not do it if we don't have to.
No, I understand that, but I mean.
Yes, the
it's not
intent was,
allowed.
I think, in principle, our understanding is correct. I think if we did use the minutes of the Constitutional Convention, and if we put delegates like Don Netsch, who's an expert in finances and financial law and state law, as well as being a delegate, on the stand, we could make one hell of a great argument that that's true. That the intent of the framers of the Constitution, the intent of all legislation that's passed the legislature related to pensions, all of that, the intent was, yes, there is a constitutional guarantee. My only point is, let's keep that story alive as it is, and we shouldn't pull a trigger trying to outfox the business community, who are genuinely concerned. I mean, they are concerned about the state going bankrupt, because I've told you what it would do to us, but imagine what it would do to the business community. You know, every hospital in the state is owed tens of millions, hundreds of millions, depends on what they've been doing in the care they provide, of dollars by the state of Illinois. They don't get paid. We fire all the nurses or something like that. Or the hospitals go bankrupt. The whole communities are devastated. And I just use that as an example. If you go across businesses and social agencies, it'd be like the Great Depression. It's what I call the second wave of this recession, if that comes to pass. So we want to stay as far from that as we can while we push forward and make things better.
What of our 3% annual pension increase? What your thoughts on that?
It would have been better to have it. Again, I wouldn't go to court for it for all the reasons I've just said. I think there's too much at stake. In a different time and a different circumstance, I might say, test it out, you might win on it. But in this case, I don't want to open the bigger issue. Now, if it goes on over time, that, you know, could, in the state we're in a better financial situation, then yeah, it might be worth testing the automatic increase. You notice it happened with the Social Security COLA also. I mean, I'm sure most of you have noticed one way or another. So yes, it's better, it'd be worth arguing with the governor and the legislature. They ought to do this, that they ought to give the 3% increase. Pay back the increase they're not giving this year, whatever. As a political argument, I think it's fine. Again, I wouldn't want to argue it in court because of a much bigger stake that we have in the current legal standings that as pensions have.
Can I comment on that?
Yes, you may know where they're
Several years ago, we had the former CSUAA Executive Director, Dan Slack, here for one of our meetings. And that question came up, and he said it was CSUAA's position that the COLA was a contract paid for by premiums when employees are active, and that it would be protected under the federal constitution, under the contract guarantee clause. That was CSUAA's position. George.
About raising taxes, this is, can the state government get aid from the federal government in some sort of way? The
Sure.
taxes at this time,
It's very hard and it has a very negative
High.
effect.
unemployment
Right.
and so on, raising taxes across the board is not desirable economic policy. serious.
No, and there's we have a simple example in federal history. It was called the revenue sharing program, which was sponsored by Republicans and Democrats. I didn't hear any Republicans campaigning this time on going back to revenue sharing. For the city of Chicago, about $100 million a year, approximately. I can't remember what amount went to the state because it was done a different way at the state level. But again, $100 million would be quite welcome. The problem is I don't see any hope of getting that through the Congress. It might. The states are in bad shape. A wise Congress would take a look at the problem and say we need to make sure the states don't collapse or go bankrupt, in the phrase used earlier. Even if they didn't go bankrupt as a business person might go bankrupt. The same effect happens when you can no longer pay your bills over time. I think, if you were asking me to testify before Congress, was revenue sharing a great idea? I would say yes. Do I think I could get it through the U.S. Senate as now constituted with 6 new Republican senators in the place of 6 Democrats? I don't think so. I don't think I can sell it. Now, if we can sell it, that's just fine. I mean, I can make all the rational arguments about why that would be better than having to increase sales taxes or income taxes at the local level, or property taxes or whatever, and how it would be better for the economy, for the federal government, since they just printed all this new money to give us some of it. I can make a rational argument. I don't think I can make a winning political argument to the new Congress, and I don't think it'll be the first item on the agenda of the lame duck Congress. They have these other pressing issues. The tax cuts is the first one up front, but there are a bunch of others. They have to fight off the Republican effort to roll back the health plan, the health law, and so on. I don't mean to paint a gloomy picture. This is simply, most of you have been here, I recognize many of you from my many years here. We've had recessions before, not quite like this one, but we had in the 90s a recession, we had in the 80s a recession. After 2001, we had a recession in Chicago. Lost 80,000 jobs in the tourist industry in all forms, had us to have to lay off 1,000 city workers and so on. I sort of feel like I've been in this motion picture before, and I actually think that the numbers are right, that in terms of the economy, we're beginning to be where we can get out of the mess. The problem is it takes 2 years after we get out of the mess before that money becomes available to state and local governments. So it isn't an instant fix. So I guess what I would say is stay the course. Whatever your particular political views, find political candidates you can back in the important elections, city one coming up and the one in 2 years for all of the offices. Press a lobbying agenda that makes sense. Don't pick the most extreme, crazy, wonderful cause that would be nirvana. Pick something that might get enough votes to pass, or that you can bring enough force, because it's so important to so many people that the legislative branch particularly has to pay attention. And that's why, I keep going back to this #1 agenda. If we could at least get the income tax through, we would solve a whole host of problems, not all. It wouldn't be home free by any means. And I will admit, as George suggests, that increasing the income tax will have some negative effects on the economic recovery. But I think we would still recover, is my own evaluation of that.
Regarding the income tax increase, I had heard that the best chance that the legislature had of taking action on that was between the dates of January 1st and the 10th. Why is that? Is that because of the lame duck?
Yes, exactly why. One option is the veto session. I expect Governor Quinn to push it in the veto session, and so people should be pushing to try and pass it in the veto session. The veto session has some limitations, however. The best chance is in the January period. Everybody knows whether they're staying or they're going. There is the most momentum possible. And I believe, one of you that's a legislative specialist might correct me, I believe we switch the requirements to simple majority instead of the 60%.
Yes.
As of January 1st. Now, don't ask me why that happens. Seems crazy to me. I'd wait till, if I were writing the laws, I'd wait for the new session. But my understanding is that in fact it becomes technically easier in terms of numbers. We still need to it would be wonderful to get any Republicans to agree to any version, and it would be even more important to get the Democrats to go ahead and act, even if they have to bear the brunt of having acted.
Could we get a couple of casino Republicans to possibly come over if we put that into effect? The Danville?
There are some Republicans who lost the election, who, and I've even talked to a couple of them who didn't even stand for election. There are some possibilities, not totally impossible. And for Madigan's purpose, he needs just a few Republican votes to say it wasn't all the Democrats.
John, yeah, what do you think about a tax which would tax everybody who lives or visits Illinois, including pensioners, pensioners that don't pay any state income tax?
I'm sorry, let's try all those parts again.
Yeah, we don't,
Let me take the visitor question first.
Right.
Because we've looked at the possibility, because London has done it, of taxing all the suburbanites who come to downtown Chicago to work, for instance. And to split, say, their income tax or their sales tax money according to both where they work and where they live. Or in the case of London, they were trying to make tolls to come into the city, so essentially became toll roads. There are a variety of different purposes. New York has come the closest to trying to pass that kind of business. We have all kinds of tourist tax, hotel tax, sales tax and stuff. But to have a specific visitor tax to visit a state or to visit a city has not been done, and I don't think anybody's got the votes to do it. Even if we could craft it, I don't think that's going to fly. If your question is, should the money that there is a possibility that the money that pensioners receive from all sources of income, other retirement packages, Social Security, so on and so forth, could be, instead of being exempted by Illinois, could be taxed if you get beyond a certain bracket, in the normal tax bracket system. That is probably doable. That is probably not constitutionally protected and so forth, because they're simply taxing your income. Will that happen? I don't know. Let me just take a quick poll in the room. How many of you would like to have your retirement income taxed by the state of Illinois? Okay, how many of you wouldn't like to have your retirement income taxed by the state of Illinois? So there are some folks who wouldn't like it, and I suspect if you took all pensioners, the vote would be much more lopsided towards Merrill's position than towards those of you that voted that you would be willing to have your pension taxed. So much of this is a matter of numbers. As the old Mayor Daley used to say, you got the votes. You got the votes, you can do almost anything. It isn't usually a matter of logic. It's a matter of numbers. Now, sometimes logic can help you get the numbers, but it's primarily you got the votes for Plan A or Plan B.
One other group is people who are paid in cash. So they don't pay any taxes. They don't have any reportable income.
Well, the feds have gotten around that pretty well. I don't know if you know any waiters or waitresses, but their cash tips are now counted by the restaurant and they are taxed. So if it's there's always black market kind of stuff that isn't taxed, but if it's an establishment where there is a constant money exchange like tips that's in cash, no, that can be taxed. All of it legally should be taxed under the law. It's a matter of whether or not it is reported in a way, but particularly because the feds have been interested in this whole question more than the state. They're closing most of the cash loopholes as fast as they can figure out how to do it. And they have made major changes in that. It used to be if you were a waiter, you didn't have to report something, but you wouldn't report your real income. You don't get by with that anymore if you work at a normal restaurant. Otherwise, the restaurant's closed down and the owner doesn't want that, so they actually report it. I've seen them count the tips at night and actually assign Mary Joan got $150 of tips tonight. That's on their tax report. Well, thank you very much. I hope to see all of you either in Springfield or some legislator's office later.
I was actually a student here. I moved here. Yeah. 67. Yeah. Wow. The groundwork for making it